Hello and welcome to my very first story of my life that I'm putting up on this channel. And I can't think of a better story of my life to start with as an introduction than my first day of school. It was an interesting day, to say the least, and quite a number of lessons can be learned from my first day of school. So, in the first story of my life, let's start with my first day at school. So, what happened at my first day of school? Literally, of course, my mum walked me to school because I hadn't been to the school before, and she dropped me off at the school, and we were in the playground with all the other kids. And as happens in a playground, one of the bigger boys was bullying one of the smaller boys in the playground. And even as a 5-year-old, I'd been taught, help those less able to help themselves, defend those less able to defend themselves. And it was a very small boy that this bully was bullying around. And so I walked over to the bully and said, "Hey, stop bullying the little kid." And the bully said to me, as you can imagine, 5-year-olds in a playground, said, "Who's going to make me?" And I said, "Me." So, okay, we put up our fists and we had a fight. And of course, I have 2 older brothers. And my 2 older brothers used to beat the tar out of me when I was a little boy. And my dad used to not intervene. He'd say, the boy has to learn how to defend himself. And if I intervene, that's helping him out too much. One day he'll be big enough and strong enough to whip his brothers. And so my brothers used to whip the tar out of me as a little kid. Obviously 2 years and 4 years older than me, they're obviously bigger than me, right? Wasn't a fair fight. So this bully was my age and he stood little chance, and the fight didn't last for very long. He had a cut lip and a bleeding nose in less than a minute, and was begging for me to stop. I had him down on the ground on top of him, and he was begging for the fight to be over within a minute. So I let him up. And of course, we were firm friends. He never ever bullied anybody else ever again, and we became quite decent friends all through our primary school years. And that was the very first thing that happened to me on my first day of school. Walked in the schoolyard, saw a bully bullying another kid, and I stepped in and defended the other kid with violence and force. Okay. Now, one of the things, of course, the moral to that story is one of the things that people criticize me for today, 45 years later, is that I say I reserve the right to use force up to and including deadly force to defend my life, my liberty, my property, proceeds of my labor, and those placed into my care by my Creator, right? 45 years ago, a kid standing up to a bully and saying, "Hey, don't bully the other kids," and being prepared to put it up with a fight, and then actually having the fight and winning the fight, right? That was considered good, right? That's good. You defended the person less able to defend themselves. 45 years later, of course, I'm obviously a violent man and have violent tendencies, right? If I say here that I'm prepared to defend people, including myself, I'm obviously a horrible, violent man. So what was championed in the schoolyard 45 years ago is now condemned and criticized. Of course, in a schoolyard now, if a bigger kid was bullying a smaller kid, and someone like me, 45 years ago, went over and said, "Hey, don't do that," and if he says, "Who's going to make me?" you say, "I am." And if he puts up his fist to fight, you have the fight and you win. Of course, if a 5-year-old boy did that today, he'd be on Ritalin because he'd have ADHD, and he'd be a violent child, and he'd need to be sedated in some way or other, right? That's what goes on today. And interestingly, that lesson of stand up to the bullies in the schoolyard, I was at Heathrow Airport a few years back, and this man, giant of a man, he was at least 6'2" and 20 stone, if not 22 stone. He was a big man, and he worked for the people there at Heathrow, the people who administer Heathrow, not as in working behind a counter for one of the airlines or whatever. He was part of the security people who patrol around Heathrow. And he was absolutely bawling this little guy out. The little guy was about 5'6", 5'7", tiny little skinny guy, 10 stone wringing wet, right? And this big guy was yelling at him and screaming at him and standing over the top of him, really being obnoxious and bullying him. And they were both workers at the place, and I was just standing there waiting for my car, waiting for my driver to come along, and I could hear the conversation because the guy's screaming. And the situation was some woman had told this big guy whatever about the smaller guy, and the big guy was threatening to beat the tar out of the smaller guy on the allegations, false or otherwise, of this woman. And this went on for 3 or 4 minutes, and I was standing 10, 12 feet away. So in the end, I walked over and put myself in between these two guys and looked up at this big guy. I'm 6'1", I had to look up into his face, right? So he was well over 6'2". And I looked up and I said, "Hey, you're acting like a 5-year-old. You're acting like a complete idiot. Stop behaving like this in public. Stop behaving like this to this man. If you have a disagreement with him, you go sit down in a conference room and you have your discussion, and do it politely and professionally." And I said that to this guy right in front of this is near the taxi rank at Heathrow. So that was Friday night. There was hundreds of people around, right? And this guy looked at me, glared at me, and I looked back at him, and he's obviously thinking, should I hit this guy? And obviously it would be stupid to hit me. But, obviously if he did hit me, I'd hit him back, right? So in our society today, when somebody's bullying somebody else and victimizing somebody else, they won't even do what I did in the schoolyard 45 years ago, walk up and say, "Hey, don't do that. That's not right. Don't bully this guy. Don't use your size and your weight and the ability that you could beat this man in a fight to bully him around. You do it professionally and politely. Don't do that. And if you don't want to do that, you're going to have me to deal with." People don't do that anymore. And I think it's sad that they don't. So that was the first thing that happened to me on my first day of school, right? The next thing that happened to me was this other boy. Of course, we were all boys thrown in together in our first day at school. We didn't know each other mostly. I only knew my friend who came along with me. And so the next thing that happened was we were introducing ourselves and what's our name, etc., etc. And of course, my name is Peter. And so this other boy said, your name's Peter. Peter, pumpkin eater, had a wife and couldn't keep her, put her in a pumpkin shell, and there he kept her very well. Which is, taunting. A 5-year-old boy doing that in the schoolyard on your first day. It's just taunting the other boy. So I went over and I just gave him one smack in the nose. Just bang, one smack in the nose. And of course, this was near the time we were supposed to go into the classroom, and a teacher saw me punch this kid. And she came over and said, "What did you do that for?" And I said, "Well, he said, Peter, pumpkin eater, had a wife and couldn't keep her. Put her in a pumpkin shell, and there he kept her very well. So I hit him." "What's your problem with that?" And she goes, you're not allowed to hit the other boys," waving her finger at me. "Come with me." And I went, "Yeah, okay." And I went into the classroom, and she got a feather duster out. Like a feather duster has a little keen handle and has these feathers on it that you dust windows and curtains and things like that with. It's called a feather duster. She says, "Put your hand out." And I went, "Yeah." And she hit me with the feather duster. I'm like, "Well, what are you hitting me for?" And she said, "I'm hitting you because you're not allowed to hit other boys." I'm like, "Excuse me?" She's like, "Put your hand out." She hit me again. I'm like, it didn't hurt. So I wasn't objecting to being hit. I'm like, "You're hitting my hand. What are you hitting me for? Can you explain yourself, please?" Remember, I'm a 5-year-old, and she's hitting me with a feather duster. And I was like, "Well, what are you hitting me for?" And she says, "I'm hitting you because I'm teaching you a lesson. You're not allowed to hit anybody." I'm like, "You're telling me I'm not allowed to hit anybody, and the way you're telling me that is by hitting me?" And I'm standing there going, what kind of idiot is this woman? I'm a 5-year-old, and already I'd figured out this woman's a complete idiot. If the idea is you're not allowed to hit anybody, what gives you the right to hit me? You're not my mother. You're not my father. Okay? What's this even all about, right? So the hypocrisy of she turned out to be my teacher. Her name was Miss Robinson. And I'm standing there as a 5-year-old going, this is completely hypocritical. You're not my mother, you're not my father, you don't get to hit me, right? What's this even all about? So then we went into the classroom, and of course in schools, a lot of schools in Australia, they have polished boards as the boards in the classroom, right? Now you got to remember, I'm a 5-year-old boy, and I've never seen a area this big of polished wooden floor, right? So what's a 5-year-old boy going to do when he sees a great big area of a polished wooden floor? He's going to take his shoes off and slide up and down on it, right? This is like a slide. This is fun. Let's go. And so my buddy and I, the guy, he lived around the corner from me, he started school the same day, my friend, his name was Glenn, so we started sliding up and down the floor and then diving onto it and sliding on our uniform. We were having a merry old time. And because 5-year-old boys want to have fun, right? You know, and this is something new, so we were playing. And the teacher, oh, come here, boys. Stop doing that. Stop doing that. Stop doing that. No, we don't want to stop doing this. This is fun. We don't want to stop doing this. Well, boys, stop doing this. She says, come over here. What? Hold your hand out. I'm like, are you going to hit me again? She goes, yes. I go, well, okay. You want to hit me again? Hit me again. But he said, you know, she says, if you don't stop sliding on the floor, I'm going to cane you with a feather duster. And I said, so you're saying to me, you want me to stop, and I don't want to stop, and my punishment is you're going to cane me with a feather duster. And my friend and I looked at each other and we put our hand out and said, okay. So she hit us with the feather duster, and then we went back to sliding up and down on the floor. She says, boys, come back here. And we're like, what? She says, I told you not to slide. She said, and we said, yeah, you told us not to slide, and you told us that the punishment for sliding is you'll hit us with a feather duster, and we figure that's a good deal. So you hit us with the feather duster, and now we're sliding again. We paid the price, now we're sliding up and down on the floor again. Like, what's your problem? And the two of us were there arguing with her going, what's your problem? You said the penalty for sliding on the floor was two hits with the feather duster. Now we've paid a price, now we're going to slide up and down on the floor again. And we couldn't figure out what her problem was, right? Because if you say to a boy, okay, well, you know, if you slide on the floor, I'll hit you with the feather duster, the boy goes, cost-benefit analysis. Feather duster doesn't hurt at all, so that's okay. So we just kept sliding. And, you know, these are two 5-year-old boys and a kindergarten teacher. She had no idea how to speak to us or how to control us, etc., etc. So she finished up, she took us to the principal. And the principal's obviously a man, right? So she took us up to the principal and said, these boys are misbehaving, they won't do what I say, blah, 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 blah. And we said, no, we're not misbehaving. We're sliding on the floor. She wanted to hit us, so she hit us with the feather duster as the penalty, and then we went back to sliding on the floor. She hit us again with the feather duster, and that's okay because the feather duster doesn't hurt. We're not doing anything wrong, we're just sliding on the floor. It's fun, it's good. And what's your problem? To the principal. Because, you know, we're 5-year-old boys. And I'll never forget, the principal looked at us and he said, okay, boys, I understand what the position is. I understand what you're saying. Now, I'm asking you, would you please do what I ask you to do? I want you to do as your teacher asks you to do, please. Will you boys do that for me? And we went, oh, okay. If this is what we're supposed to do here, you want us to do what the teacher asks to do. And you've asked us politely, kind of thing. So, okay, yeah. If that's what you want, you're the principal, you're supposed to be the boss around here. If that's what you want, we'll do what the teacher asks us to do, I guess. Fine. So that's all it took. All it took was for the principal to sit down and say, oh, you boys are having fun. would you please do what I ask you to do? Yeah, we will, okay. Ask nicely. And so, would you please do what your teacher tells you to do? Oh, okay. Not a problem. Kind of how to deal with 5-year-old boys. Ask them politely what it is that you want them to do. So then, of course, we had our day, and I went home to dinner. And in our house in those days, dinner was always at the dinner table, right? There was 5 of us, mum, dad, and 3 boys. And what dinner time was very much about was for us boys to tell dad how our day was. And that was when dad dispensed his advice and guidance and wisdom, was at the dinner table, right? And so the obvious question from my father that night when I was at the dinner table was, Peter, how was your day today? What was your first day at school like? And I said, it was something really funny. Lots of really funny things happened. And he said, well, tell me about them. So I didn't bother telling him about the fight because that's normal. But I said, this other boy said, Peter, pumpkin eater, had a wife and couldn't keep her, etc. So I punched him. And then the teacher came along and she hit me with a feather duster. Now, I don't even understand what that was all about. Can you explain that to me, please? Can you tell me what that was about, please? And he says, okay, yeah, sure. He said, first of all, in your life, other little boys will try and call you names and provoke you. Okay, they will call you names. And what I want you to remember about that is sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. I want you to remember that. And because people who call you names, they're not as good as you are, they're less than you are, and they know they're not as good as you are. So what they try and do is they try and call you names to provoke you into a fight, provoke you into an argument, and try and get you punished, which is exactly what happened, right? This other little boy provoked you, you hit him, and then you got hit by the feather duster as a kind of punishment. And I went, yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. What's this feather duster thing all about? And I said, I don't get it, I don't understand. He says, well, it's supposed to be punishment. I said, well, how's it supposed to be punishment? It doesn't hurt. Said, like, if I was naughty and you spanked me, you hurt me, right? I know I'm being punished because it hurts, but the feather duster doesn't hurt. So that's supposed to be punishment, is it? And he said, yeah, being hit with the feather duster is supposed to be punishment for a 5-year-old boy. I went, really? Okay. So, when the teacher hits me with the feather duster, it's kind of like you spanking me, only it doesn't hurt. And he goes, yeah, kind of. He said, look, do this for me. I know that the feather duster doesn't hurt, and I know that you don't feel like it's punishment, okay? But I'd like to ask you, please do what your teacher says, okay? When you're at school, please do what your teacher says. So that's really funny because the principal said the same thing to me. And he said, the principal said the same thing to you. How did you get to meet the principal today? and then I told him the rest of the story about sliding on the floor, etc., etc. And I said, she took Glenn and I to the principal. And he said, it's very funny because the principal said the same thing. He said, would you boys do what I ask you to do? And we said, yes. And he said, well, you boys, would you please do what your teacher tells you to do? We said, oh, okay, now that you've asked politely. And Dad said, well, that's pretty interesting that the principal has said exactly the same thing. So there I was on my first day of school, my dad taught me, as a result of my first day of school, that other kids that I meet that I don't even know, don't know me, I don't know them, are going to call me names and try and provoke me into things and get me into trouble, right? With the, quote, authority, being the teacher of the classroom, right? And of course, fast forward 45 years, what happens when I stand up and speak out about what's going on in the family law courts? People who don't even know me call me names and tell me lies, tell lies about me, right? Thousands of them. And how is that any different to my first day of school when I walked into the schoolyard and some kid that I'd never met before who didn't know me, immediately on finding out my name is Peter, decides to try and provoke me, tries to upset me and aggravate me and provoke me. How is that any different to what goes online today, where people who don't even know me, know nothing about me, nothing about my history, tell lies about me and call me names, trying to provoke me into saying something, so then they can run to the censors and say, see, this man must be banned because of what he said. Okay? If adults, alleged adults today, are not acting exactly like that 5-year-old boy did on my first day of school, I will eat my desk lamp here on my table, right? So, oh my goodness, look at that, that's 20 minutes already. So that was my first day of school, right? My first day of school. Came one fight, one just smack in the face to another kid, came twice, and off to the principal's office. That did kind of set the tone for me at school. So I hope you found that entertaining, and I hope you drew a little lesson from the idea that standing up for other people is the right thing to do, okay? And that people calling you names, that's just what you can expect from people who are less than you. and perhaps you can feel pity for them for being so much lesser than you. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope that we do more stories like this. Thanks very much for listening.